Hey guys, this is JAde with All Jamming, and today we're going to be looking at Hermod by Squarp Instruments. If you're not familiar with Squarp Instruments, they're the people that created the Pyramid Sequencer, which is one of my favorite hardware sequencers out there right now. Hermod is also a sequencer, but it's not the pyramid in modular form. It's similar to the pyramid in many ways, but it's string, sly, and working specifically with a modular system, and that's what we're going to look at today. Okay, so let's get right to it. So the layout is pretty straightforward. We have 8 tracks that default as 8 melodic tracks, meaning that we get pitch and gate for each of our 8 tracks. But we don't need 8 oscillators to enjoy Hermod because we can use the tracks for other things. So let's go into track 1. I'm going to press the encoder. Press again. And I'm going to choose 2 voices. I can choose from 2 voices in unison, a mono voice with velocity, or a polyphonic voice. Now we have 1 mono voice. Pitch and gate, and our second track is velocity. Now let's try 3 voices. That will give us 1 voice with aftertouch and velocity. You can see the colors to the right change to let us know what type of layout that track has. Okay, so now I'm going to send volt per octave from rings into the pitch output and strum into the gate output. I'm going to play some steps in by activating a button. Each button represents a step. Then I'm going to send audio out of rings into my mixer and press play. Put in some more steps. So in step mode is where we can edit our sequence. One way of doing it is by placing steps and then holding a step and turning the encoder to choose a note. You can see what note is placed on the top right of the screen. Let's send our aftertouch track into damping and play some steps. On velocity and aftertouch tracks, the second output will still send out gates, so it doesn't go to waste. And now velocity into rings position. Select the track. We can select the track by either holding the track and using the 8 buttons or by turning the encoder. Then we go to step, where is where we edit our tracks. Now let's add a modulation voice. We're going to select track 4, layout, 1 voice, and instead of mono, we're going to select modulation. You can confirm you're in a modulation track because the step menu looks a bit different. The modulation light is blue. So I'm going to send modulation into rings brightness. Now when I hold the step and turn the encoder, I edit the modulation. Okay, so now let's go back to track 1 and add some more to the sequence. While in step mode, I'm going to press the encoder. Here we can randomize, copy, paste, and delete all steps. I'm going to select copy page, which is going to copy this whole sequence. Then I'm going to lengthen my sequence by holding down Y and turning the encoder. We can add up to 64 steps per track, but I'm just going to add 1 more bar. You can use the encoder to easily switch between pages. So now that I've copied page 1, I'm going to paste it on page 2. Go to page 2 and change some steps. Okay, now let's take a look at our MIDI effects. If you press the encoder while on the first effect, that's the MIDI settings. You can access things like quantize, root note, fine tune, bend range, minimum and maximum note, and mod range. That leaves us with 7 effect tracks. The first is arpeggiator, but we're going to take a look at that one later. The next is chance. Let's try that. This effect does just that. It plays the notes by chance. The closer to 100%, the more active steps. The lower the percentage, the more silences we have. Let's add another effect. Let's try delay, which is one of my personal favorites. There's lots of options to edit for each effect too, which is nice. Euclidean. Let's try the glide. It can be linear, exponent, or smooth. Harmonizer. LFO. And we have one slot left. Let's do ratchet, another one of my personal favorites. Okay, so now that we have all of our effects active, we can turn them on and off. This is a great performance feature because it gives you a lot of hands-on control while performing. One thing I wish they would add though is the ability to add effects to individual steps. Like the ability to only have steps 3 and 5 with delay, things like that. The Squarp pyramid is always being updated with new features, so I do have high hopes for Hermod. Okay, onto the sequences. Here we get a visual representation of our loop. Here we can access our project settings like copy, paste, or clear. We're going to go into project and save our project. Name our project, Dallas. X to save. Here our 8 buttons represent 8 sequences. You can think of these as patterns pretty much. So now we're going to go on to sequence number 2. You can see all our steps are gone because it's a new sequence. For this part, we're going to explore the different ways of inputting notes into Hermod. I'm going to plug my OP1 USB into the Hermod USB host. Enter MIDI mode on the OP1, and now we should be able to play rings with the OP1 keyboard. So one way of doing this is to live record. Press the record button and the sequence automatically begins to run. There is no metronome, so you need to watch the steps and try your best to get the timing right. It's a little off, but that's okay. Remember, quantize is under the MIDI effect settings. There we go. I'm going to add another bar and show you the other way we can input notes. Hold the button and press a note. Okay, now we have 2 sequences. They're obviously in different keys, so the transitions aren't as smooth, but you get the idea. Alright, so now let's try the Hermod with the Electron Digitact. I got it all plugged in, and now I'm going to send MIDI out of Digitact into Hermod's MIDI in. We have a drum pattern on Digitact already, so that's nice. I'm on MIDI channel 1. I'm going to switch over to keyboard mode. And as expected, now I can use the Digitact as a keyboard. So now I'm going to press record and input some notes. As long as the record button is lit, we can keep on adding to the current sequence. So just because Digitact is master doesn't mean Hermod is slave just yet. Out of sync. Hold track and Y to enter clock settings. The first option is clock source. We have a few CV and clock division settings in here as well. I'm going to switch from internal to MIDI port, which are these 5 DIN ports. Host port is the regular USB port, and the device port is USB Type B. You can also send clock to these inputs to the right. I'm going to select MIDI port, and now when I start my Digitact, the Hermod receives a start stop signal. Let's add a MIDI effect. And let's add another track to Hermod. Pitch from Plonk into track 5, and Gate into track 5. Add an aftertouch and velocity track to this as well. Add some steps. If Hermod isn't on internal sync, you can't stop the sequence from Hermod itself. We need to send a stop message from Digitact. Alright, so now let's check out this arpeggiator. We have a few arpeggiator settings, like up, down, and random. We can edit the gate. And the rate. We can also go 5 octaves up and 5 octaves down. So let's record. I can go in and edit the art parameters while the sequence is playing, and it all stays in sync. Okay, so let's talk about the X and Y buttons. They did a great job color coding this thing. If you hold track and X, you will enter voice settings. If you hold track and Y, you'll be in the main settings. If you hold effects and X, it'll take you to the effect rack. It's pretty much the default anyway. If you hold effects and Y, you enter the matrix. Here you can control effect parameters using CC messages as well as the CV inputs. If you hold sequence and X, you activate song mode, which allows you to create a song with your sequences. Press the buttons to choose a sequence and in what order you want them to play. Here on the screen, we can see when each sequence ends and the other begins. These melodies are kinda all over the place. It is all for learning purposes. If we press sequence and Y, we can choose how we want our sequences to transition. The default is sequential, which means that the next sequence plays when the current sequence is finished. Let's turn this down. Jump switches to the next sequence as soon as you choose another sequence. The next play mode is restart, which restarts the chosen sequence every time a button is pressed. And last but not least are our BPM settings. To access these, quickly press the record and play button simultaneously. Here we can change our tempo settings, but since Hermod is in slave mode, nothing happens when we try to change our tempo. So that was the Squarp Hermod. If you learned something today, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon or with a one-time PayPal donation for more tutorials and reviews. Catch you later.